Hey, what's up, everybody? I just wanted to please ask everybody sign up to my Patreon, patreon.com, MikeGrib8, just like my Twitter at. It really helps support the podcast, and yeah, I'm really need the help from you guys. I really appreciate everybody who has signed up so far. So thank you so much. So we can keep doing this work on improving scouting and just learning and spreading knowledge about basketball scouting. Really appreciate all the listeners, and if you can't, it's understandable. But if you could, please help me out on Patreon, patreon.com at MikeGrib8. Thank you so much.
A lot of times we'll cross recruit as well. Like when I'm looking at young men that may be, good for us on the national level, I may see a kid that's really good, but maybe just a little younger than we'd like right then, and not, physically prepared for it or something like that. And we may have them play regional or, whatever the case may be. So, but nonetheless, 9th through 12th grade, young men that are looking to play at the next level. Obviously, with our team, it's pretty high level guys. So you'll have a lot of high major and mid major plus type kids, as well as a couple, low major guys sprinkled in as well.
So you'd say there's like an element of scouting, right, in your own recruitment where you're like looking for like the players that might best fit your program or certain like archetypes to make that.
Absolutely. So, I have to, I know what the head coach at our program is looking for, and that Coach Mike Wright. And I know what type of kid is, what we would call a Mike Wright kid, so to speak, and the things that we're looking for in order to, progress our program not only, but also, fits what he's looking for. Not only schematically, but from a culture perspective. That really matters a lot. So, um, definitely have an element of scouting in what I'm doing, paying attention to little things from not only the eye test facet, but also a lot of the statistical stuff as well. Like I can go into both sides to see, what makes sense for us.
So can you go like statistically first? Like how do you use statistics, especially at such a like a for younger kids?
Yeah, so I'm not gonna say I'm as statistically versed as maybe someone like yourself or Mike or some of the higher level analytics guys that you would see at the next level, but I'm definitely well tuned in with things like efficiency and shooting percentage from particular areas. Those things matter a lot. Obviously, the other types of stats that you can look at as far as rebounding or assist to turnover ratio or things that are important for us as well, just depending on what the role is of the person that we're looking for. We're this, for example, this year, we've got a really good shooting team. We've got a lot of guys that are efficient from the 3-point line, that take a lot of good shots in good spaces as well. So that was something that was of value to us over the summer, was finding guys that not only fit the culture and the style that we're looking for, but guys that can put the ball on the floor and they can shoot the ball, giving us that versatility. So, we've got guys that can shoot the ball at every position, from 1 down to the 5, from 5'9" to 6'10". And so that was one of the things that we looked at from an analytics standpoint that was important to us, is how well can this person shoot, based on the small, obviously a very small set of information that we're able to attain, watching games over the summer, for grassroots stuff, watching film or games from their previous seasons, things like that. So sample size isn't as big, obviously, but try to work with what we've got primarily.
So like other than like there's obviously the big players that are already shooting like maybe like 40% from three, or maybe for AAU, I know like the 3-point percentages are a little like deflated a little bit. But
Mhm.
like how do you project shooting improvement? So if you see a certain player, are there any statistical indicators, maybe on the court indicators that you can point to and think that maybe they have like good underlying touch, perhaps they can really make jumps in their shooting development?
That's actually a really good question, man. I think a lot of times shot selection goes into that. I do think that especially in grassroots, it's a little more loose, obviously, as far as how the game is being played, because they don't get as much time to spend with these guys practicing sets and things of that nature. So I do believe that shot selection is a big part of it. If I see, a young man that may be shooting, say 35%, but he's not necessarily getting the best shots or the most open shots, then I can see how that could still translate. That 35% guy could be 40% with us based on, we're going to get him his shots and his spots through certain actions or through certain set plays to make sure that he has the opportunity to get clean looks at it versus just kind of taking what he's got to get in a shorter period of time. Rotations come into play with things like that. There may be guys that they may take a high volume of shots over the summer when they're playing grassroots, and we may look at them and say, okay, we may give you half the shots that you took in that situation, but they're going to be better looks. So I'm sure your numbers are going to improve based on that. So things like that help to kind of adjust it, so to speak, for what we may look at. You still got some guys that are just high volume guys that are going to get them up, and they're going to get clean looks, and some of them are going to be contesting. They're still going to be high efficiency guys at the same time. But I think there is something to say, I guess, from a schematic standpoint of, we know what sets we have. We know what offense we're going to be flowing into and things of that nature, and how those things could potentially help a guy improve the numbers that we may see over the summer, for example.
Okay, that makes sense. So would you, if you see like two different prospects, right, and they both have pretty broken shots, like the energy transfer is it's completely screwed.
Yep.
Are there any like underlying touch indicators? Like maybe you look at them and say, oh, this guy's a great mid-range shooter, this guy's a great free throw shooter, like stuff like that. What are like some underlying indicators that even if the shot is completely messed up, maybe they don't have the volume because they can't even get the shot up in time. So like
Right.
what other indicators beyond like shot volume or shot frequency that you can use to like perhaps like project improvements in shooting?
If we're looking at it as far as like eye test, for example, maybe it's not something analytics, like you said, it could be mechanics. And so, for example, even this past season, we had a young man that was extremely efficient shooting from the mid-range, but as efficient as he was from the mid-range, he was just as inefficient, excuse me, from three-point. And a lot of it had to do with the mechanics, like you said, the energy transfer, so to speak. So he's coming out of the mid-range and he gets a different level of bounce. He has a true jump shot from the mid-range, whereas from the three, he's taking more of a set shot, and his mechanics change to try to make up for the lack of power from that. So we could look at him and say, if we can get him to buy into the changes of replacing the habits that he has from the three-point range with the habits that he has from the mid-range shot, then I truly believe that he could change and be a way more efficient three-point shooter, because things are going to look the same. The energy transfer is going to be the same. He'll get more power on that shot, which will make it easier as far as the arm and hand mechanics. So little things like that. We've got guys that have come in even this year that have changed tremendously as far as their shooting mechanics, just based off of working with some of our skill development coaches for little things like hand placement on the ball. A kid like Rakees Passmore, who had a good summer with Garner Road AAU program on a 3SSB circuit. He wasn't the most efficient three-point shooter over the summer. And a lot of that had to do with, with not only shot selection, but mechanics as well, with little things. He had decent form, but he put in a lot of work and worked with, some trainers over the summer. And then once he got to us, he worked with some of our guys on campus, on staff, and it's just small tweaks. His lower body stuff was good, but we had to change little things about where his hand placement was on the ball or how it's coming out of his hand. And he has since gone from being, a kid that's shaky from three over the summer to being one of the most efficient three-point shooters in our entire program at this point. So it's just little tweaks that you can make for certain things, but there's obviously some guys that are so far off the I guess the cusp of return, the guys that are, you think of kids like Michael Kidd Gilchrist when he was shooting the ball, and it's just like, I don't know if I can do anything with that. You know what I mean? But he had a lot of other things that made him special, enough to be an NBA player. So yeah, it's there's definitely little things that you can look at mechanically that can make you say, okay, I can fix that or I can work with that.
Are there any like random trends you've seen? Maybe you have no idea like why that's the case, but some random correlations where there's common trends within players who all suddenly improve their shooting development like pretty drastically. Is there like a common trait within them that you've noticed over your years?
Hmm, that's a good question. I think the most common trend, and I don't know if I'm answering this properly or not, and if I'm not, just feel free to tell me. But I think the most common trend that we've seen just in general is the ability for bigger guys to shoot the ball, and shoot it more cleanly, if that makes sense. I think in the past, obviously, as we've grown up over the years, big guys weren't expected to shoot the three. And that changed, progressively over time to the point where now it's almost an expectation. I would say everybody that we have that is considered a big or a post player, all has the ability to step out and shoot a jump shot. And I think it goes down to just even training as a young man. It's gotten to that point now where the trend with mechanics and whatnot about bigs has become, okay, yeah, you can make a hook shot, left hand, left shoulder hook shot, right shoulder hook shot, excuse me. Um, but you got to be able to step out and actually have shot mechanics. It can't just be like, okay, I'm just going to live with whatever, mechanics I was born with type thing. Like, you have to really, truly understand how to shoot the ball now. It makes them more valuable to coaches at every level. And it makes them, I wouldn't really say obsolete, but it definitely limits what they can bring to the table at this point in time. If you're a big that doesn't have that ability, you have to truly be stellar, I think, from what we've seen in other areas, rebounding the ball, shot blocking, rim protecting, things of that nature, to kind of get away with not having a jump shot anymore.
Oh, so would you say it's if you see two players, right, and one's maybe like 6'3" and the other's like 6'7", they both have somewhat equally broken shots, you'd always defer probably to the bigger the wing, or
I more than likely. I mean, you would say more than likely. You go with things that can't be taught. Size, speed, athleticism, things of that nature. Um, all things being equal, you would go towards the bigger player there because they could probably be more versatile and help you in more ways than a 6'3" point guard. But there's so many other things that can come into play there, right? Like, if size difference apart and both having bad shots, if there's a point guard out there that can run the show and that's a lockdown defender that I know is gonna, really give the other opposing guard a very hard time, that can also, contribute in rebounding the ball and assists and things of that nature, then I may look at that person over that 6'7" wing if that wing is not able to be as versatile or bring as much to the table. But I would say, all things being equal, you probably take the bigger player that's going to give you more length and versatility in those spots.
do you think like energy transfer, or maybe even more specifically, like the transition between like your handle to the shot, do you think that's more difficult if you're taller? Or do you think like anyone at any size, it's somewhat teachable or somewhat inherent?
Yeah, I think there is an aspect to it that's definitely harder at the taller you get. And I also think a lot of it is hand size. The bigger that those guys get, the bigger their hands are. And you would think that it seems like, handling the ball would be a little bit easier, but from what I've seen, at least, um, those bigs, as they get out of their dribbling, or the bigger they are, they get out of their dribbling, and it's a little bit harder to get their hand into the right place because their hand takes up so much space on the ball, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Whereas guards with a more normal size hand, you can get to your shot pocket really quick and get your hand placement right really quick a lot of times. You see guys like a Giannis, for example. He's a great ball handler. But to get into his jump shot takes a little bit longer because he's got to get to that hand placement and get the mechanics right. Whereas, you can get a guy like a Dame Lillard or whoever, Kyrie, that can get right into their handle and then boom, just rise up for a jump shot, immediately with the hand placement. So I think there is a correlation between the two, I would say.
That's actually really, I was actually going to talk about this later because I did one study like a couple months ago, and I actually found that out of like a lot of players who had outlier handle development, so
Mm-hmm.
the guys like Jimmy Butler, Paul George, Jaylen Brown, they all had below average hand sizes. Like it was
Right.
all like Paul George's hand size is he's smaller than a lot of guards, and
Right.
like a corollary that his feet are also very small. But I don't know if maybe that's just correlated hand and feet, but I don't know if you have thoughts about that. But going back to the handling, I was really confused because if you have, it seems like if you have bigger hands, it should be easier to flow into it. But that now that you're explaining, it makes a lot more sense. So you would say that it kind of does make sense that guys who are a little with smaller hands, these wings, it's a lot easier to go from the handle to the gather and then actually make a fluid shot.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And do I know exactly why that is? Not 100%, being honest, but I watch it, happen even with our guys. We've got kids that, we've got a young man right now that's a freshman from Senegal, and he's about 6'7", but his hands are massive. I mean, he can pick up the basketball and play with it like it's a tennis ball almost. But when he gets out of his dribble and goes to gather the ball, it's a slow, event there to get to that shot. And then it's really, right now it's still a little hard for him to, truly understand the flick of the wrist aspect as well because of the size of his hand. He has so much space on the ball covered when he's holding the ball, that if he right now if he were to put full power or flick his wrist, completely, he feels like he would probably shoot, to the backboard instead of actually shooting it to the rim. So it's been interesting to watch, but I definitely can see the correlation between the two, and just, kind of watching how, smaller guards can get in and out really quickly from dribble phase to gather phase to shot phase, almost in a fluid motion.
So would you say it's easier to project shooting improvements than handle improvements, or do you think you have a good grasp on both, or how does that work from a development standpoint?
Ooh, I think, and again, from what I've seen, I think that shooting development is a little easier than ball handling development. Um, I think, either way, obviously there's both repetition based. It's going to be a lot about reps. I think the one major difference with shooting is that you can stand still and do it, whereas dribbling, a lot of times you have to be on the move. So, I can practice dribbling in one space, to improve my left hand all day. And I could master standing in one spot dribbling with my left hand. But as soon as you tell me to run and do it, it's a completely different skill that I've had to master at that point. So I may be able to be the best, standstill left-handed dribbler, but I can't do it in motion. Whereas with shooting, you literally can translate standing still shooting into a game immediately because you have spot up shot opportunities. Um, so I think that translates a little bit easier as far as development goes. I think ball handling is much harder because of being on the move. And once you do learn new ball handling things, it's also very hard, from what I've, seen myself, to get the confidence to change your habits, right? So you may be right hand dominant really hard, and you work really, really hard to get your left hand up, and you still just naturally don't want to go to your left hand in a game situation because you're so comfortable already with your right hand. Whereas, a jump shot situation is you're either going to shoot it or you're not. Some guys will get gun shy, obviously, and back away from taking certain shots. But, if you're wide open a lot of times and you're not even the most confident guy, you can still take that jump shot and have a high chance of making it. once you've developed a little bit more. So those are some of the things that I've seen with it personally.
So do you focus on handle development if based on that? Because you said obviously there's like a stationary aspect of shooting, and that really isn't the case for handle. So do you have like drills that you focus on for handle development, or are you more you don't focus on that as much and you kind of just let the players just develop that or come in at that whatever threshold they're at?
No, I definitely think it's something that has to be developed 100%. Like I said, we've got a great skills training staff at our program that works on it with these guys. Our lead skills trainer, Coach Sean Robinson, is a guy that's kind of like we call him like a scientist on the court when it comes to these things, and he works really hard with that. We've got another guy, Sam Pipes, that does, what we call like daily vitamins type situations with the guys. And, he'll take guys through workouts with their left hand where they can't even touch the ball with their right. It's just all left hand dribbles, layups, finishes, whatever the case may be. So eventually that confidence should come in the process. Again, those things are going to be more in motion. So we focus primarily on training them to dribble with those in motion. So versus just stagnant, stationary dribbling, we're going to focus a lot on game type reps and game type situations. Maybe originally with nobody defending it, and then, work your way into having somebody put a physical presence there. Things like that. But it's definitely something that I think has to be worked on and developed consistently. You can't, you can, I guess, depend on a young man to try to do it on their own, so to speak, or just in time over, with trying it in game situations. But, the more that you can put the time in, it's really just about time and reps, really. The more you can rep it, the more you have the opportunity to dribble with that left hand or do those moves that you couldn't do before. The better opportunity that you're going to have to lock those into your memory bank, so to speak, and utilize them in real game situations at that point.
Okay, that makes sense. So like going off of that, could you like explain like maybe a particular drill? Because obviously handle something that you really need to do in a game like setting, right? So you need to have game like game like drills that would emulate that
Right.
that setting. So what specific drills would you run to with a group of guys to help collectively improve their handle?
Yeah, most definitely. So some of the drills that we'll see, for example, in our practices is um, we'll do a lot of ball screen stuff. So playing out of a ball screen and dribbling out of the ball screen and being able to read and react based on the defender. So your help defender is coming and you have to make a read in live action on which way you're going to go, left or right. We'll rep it on both sides. Some guys will do more on their weak side hand, obviously, to make sure that they're getting those opportunities. But we want it to look and rep, what you could see in a real game. So, if I'm going over a ball screen and I've got a guy going under, am I, bouncing back or, dribbling out with that same weak hand to make sure that I'm getting a feel for what that feels like to back out with my left hand. Or if I'm, excuse me, if I'm coming off a ball screen on the right wing with my right hand, so to speak, and my big is dropping and I want to snake, do I snake to that left hand and then keep my defender on my back hip, with my left hand still being primary there? So we work on all of those things using cones, or like they have the big cylinder cones or whatever at this point, but also using a live defender or a coach that's in that space to give you that read. And you have to continue to not only think through the game itself, but also learn how to do the offhand movements as well, and be willing to make those mistakes, because you're not going to be perfect with it. You're going to have to make mistakes in order to improve. But those are the type of drills. So it's one-on-one type drills to begin with. And then it'll flow into short-sided games. It could be a 3-on-3 type situation where you have a live defender, at those three spots, and you have to start learning how to do things like make left-hand hook passes, or, stop and turn to your left shoulder, or excuse me, over your right shoulder with your left hand to make what we call a rollback pass. So yeah, we just put them in real fast-paced game-like situations and just kind of force them to use that offhand to make it, rep more often and get more comfortable at that point.
Okay, that makes sense. So like the way you're describing it, like it seems like there's handle itself, right? And then
Yep.
there's like the ability to handle. So like that's more decision making, and then handles like just like stationary stuff where like you can work on your left hand, stuff like that. So
Right.
so the way you're portraying it, it's like a lot of handle development is somewhat linked with like your ability to make decisions on the move or in game.
Yes. Yeah, I would agree with that. And the reason I say that is because, you know, to your point, right? There's guys that can handle the ball, and then there's guys that can handle in game situations, so to speak. And then you've got guys that can do both. Like you've got, Kyrie is a guy that can do both. He's probably an elite stationary ball handler, can probably do anything you want with the ball. Steph Curry's another one. But when they go into a game situation, they can still do those same things in a game. Chris Paul, guys of that nature. But if I'm a coach and I see a guy that is a great ball handler when nobody's guarding him, but when he gets out there with pressure in front of him and he's trying to do these same things and it's not translating, you can give me the guy that's going to be more efficient, that I just know is not going to turn the ball over, that keeps it basic. He may not be the best ball handler in the world, so to speak, but he can handle the ball in game situations, and I know he's not going to be somebody that I have to worry about turning the ball over, or making the wrong pass, or not being able to make the right pass because of the fact that they don't have the ability with that offhand. He may just not be as prevalent in doing it, but still just as reliable, I'll say. Definitely looking for that reliability factor.
So this is just like a random reach, but like if decision making is somewhat similar to passing, and this is something I've noticed, like a lot of these guys who are improving their handle a lot, they're very good wing passers. So
Mhm.
have you noticed that as well? Like maybe like bigger guys who they haven't been trained to handle very much, especially earlier on, because
Right.
obviously they're bigger, right? The guards are the ones who are mainly focused on doing and handling the ball. So have you seen that players, wing guys who are better decision makers, better passers, they end up making greater handle development improvements or not as
Um,
much?
I would say I think, and I'm not 100% sure on this, but just thinking through what you're saying, I do think that there could be a correlation there. Um, and I think part of that is being able to read the floor. Having that ability to see the floor and make those passes, a lot of it is about just seeing where you're at and knowing, being able to read and react to defenders and whatnot. So, there may be something in that, so to speak, where let's say that guy, is really good as a passer, but he can also read and react to his defender that's right in front of him. So maybe it's like a Jokic, right? He's not flashy or doing anything crazy with the ball, but he's reliable as a ball handler because he can read his defender in front of him, and then also read the backside of the court as well, the tag defenders and whatnot. So he's to the point where he's efficient with his handle at this point because he's worked on, okay, I'm a great passer, but what happens when I have to put it on the floor? I want to still be able to dribble and keep this guy on my shoulder or on my hip or whatever the case may be, and feel when he's going to reach, or if he tries to go behind, or if they try to double down. So I think it kind of forces you, if you're going to have the ball in your hands on the wings, even sometimes in the short corners and things like that, the mid post, that you may have to become a bit better of a handler. Obviously there's ways around that. You've got some back to the basket guys that don't really have to handle the ball and can still be efficient as a passer. A lot of times they're able to see over the defense, they're bigger and things of that nature, so that helps. But I could see the potential to have some type of correlation between the two for sure.
Are there any certain archetypes or maybe common trends within players who make big passing improvements?
That's really a good question. Um, I will say, and this is just from like watching,
Yeah.
I guess more so NBA level. I think that there's a big trend of guys that play like the maybe like that undersized 4-man role, or even just the four in general that are starting to get really good as passers. Um, the Draymond Greens of the world, Aaron Gordon, guys of that nature that may be considered slashers, or but have started to move into the space of being facilitators out of that spot. I think Draymond does it better than a lot of people. He can, screen and short roll and then be a facilitator out of that short roll and really read the floor. So, those utility guys, the Grant Williams of the world and guys like that, I think that they are becoming valuable as undersized 4 men because of their ability to make the right passes. And I think that's a piece of development. Like, and I could be wrong. I didn't watch a lot of Draymond in college, but I don't recall him being what he is now, as far as a passer, at that NBA level. So I think from what I can recall, archetype wise, it's like that undersized utility 4-man that may not be, 6'9", but a 6'6", 6'7", long arms, and can really, be physical and read the floor really well and make himself valuable without necessarily being a high volume scorer or shooter, that type of phase. I think that they're finding ways to make themselves, valuable to teams in that role.
So like maybe more specifically within like your like experience in player development, would you say like generally speaking, like the players who are the best passers are like their guards and on the smaller end?
Yes. Traditionally, yes.
No. Do you have any like hypotheses like why that's the case? Is it simply because they were pigeonholed, or like because it seems like we're on the trend where guys who are bigger, like Cade Cunningham, for example, or
Right.
LaMelo Ball, Josh Giddey, like all these bigger guys who can handle and they can pass, like it seems a lot more advantageous because you're so much taller than everyone else, right? You have access to so many more like complex reads.
Right. I
Would
think, I think you kind of nailed it. Like, I think as a kid, when you're growing up, and this is one of those things that I think we were talking about a little bit earlier that's changing over time. As a kid, when you grow up, like, when I grew up, I was bigger than most people that I was around. And, I was always playing the five, playing the five, playing the four when you're a little kid. And when you get in, middle school, whatever, in high school, even back then, this is, prior to prep schools being a thing, primarily it was just playing at your high school or whatever. um, you know, I'm about 6'5". I was considered one of the taller guys, or on that team, I would play one of the big man roles. Um, but at that next level, especially, at the NBA level, 6'5" is a small shooting guard, basically. You know what I mean? So it's just like it's changed so much over time that, I think a lot of times still we get caught up in that, okay, well, this kid's really big, like he's going to play the five or he's going to play the four. So he's taught that the ball won't necessarily be in his hands as a floor reader, as a passer, and a ball handler, because he's going to get the ball in his spots from a point guard, so to speak. Whereas over time, I think it's becoming more natural now. And maybe I think it may, part of it is what they're seeing on TV from guys like Giannis, and guys that can put the ball in their hands and be efficient, even at, 6'10" plus or whatever the case may be. And LeBron obviously is a huge piece of that. I mean, the guy's 6'8", 6'9", and basically a point guard. I think those guys have changed the mold, so to speak, of why you're seeing guys like a LaMelo Ball who grows up saying, yeah, I might be taller than everybody else right now at 14, but I'm still training to be a point guard, regardless of how tall I get. And I think that trend is going to continue, because you can tell in general that, whether it's the NBA level, the high school level, the college level, one of the things that is valued are the things that you can't teach, which is size. And so if you have the ability to have those things that can't be taught, like the size piece, but then you can also have the ability to be better than other guys at the things that can be taught, like ball handling and floor vision and things like that, then you make yourself supremely, valuable to anybody. Um, and I think that has a big reason or big deal as why you're seeing point guards get bigger consistently. You're not seeing as many 6'1", 6'2" point guards anymore. You're seeing those guys, come out there at 6'4", 6'5", 6'6", and they're running the show like like a little guard would do in the 80s, basically. So um I think it's just a trend that's changed because of what some of the outliers have been able to do. And I think that trend also is happening with point guards or smaller guards, so to speak, where they're looking, instead of just being pigeonholed into traditionally being like a pass first point guard, now they want to be Steph Curry. They want to be able to shoot with unlimited range at 6'2", 6'3" from the point guard position. So I think it's a lot of it is just visual, what they see on TV, what they see on social media, and that trend just continuously being like, I don't have to be, this particular role just because I'm 6'8", or 6'9". So
when does this like role pigeonholing, like when is it too late to start like running the show, for example? Like you said you were 6'5", like when would you have started playing more of like a 1-2 roles rather than like being stuck at the 5? And
man,
when
I
does
think that would have had to be something in my opinion, that would have had to start probably no later than like my sophomore year of high school. I think at the absolute latest. Like, I think if you start sophomore year, for example, that gives you 3 years to try to develop, and get game speed opportunities at changing that role or changing that position. Um, Especially if you've been doing something different the entire time. Now, if you just, if you're a kid that doesn't have that much time in the game, then you may be able to adjust quicker because you haven't learned certain other things. You don't have to unlearn those things. Um, but I think, making a switch like that would probably take 2 to 3 years to really get comfortable in that position. Um, and I think you can even see that at the NBA level when you watch guys develop like the Giannis's of the world. Like, he came in as more of a traditional, I guess, wing that, but now, 3 to 4 years into his career, it's like, oh, he's bringing the ball up, a good percentage of the time for their team. And he's learned to read the floor more as a point guard versus just, running the wing and playing off of somebody else. So I would say probably 2 to 3 year type development, just to really be able to not only learn the skills that it takes, but to be proficient with them as well.
Kind of going off the Giannis thing was my next question. So if for high school, you see these guys that have like crazy physical development in such a short period of time. Like
Right.
I know CJ McCollum was like sub 6 feet, I think, in his
Right.
freshman year of high school. And now obviously he's like 6'3". So when you do see these players who make big, maybe specifically in realm of the height, so like players who have a significant growth in terms of their height in those 4 years, how does that affect their game? And are there even some disadvantages of that?
Um, personally, I haven't seen any disadvantages to it. I would say those kids probably have more of an advantage than if you flipped it, right? So to your first point, like if we're flipping it and you've got a kid that's always been bigger than everybody else, but then maybe let's say, even me, I was always bigger than everybody until a certain point, and then it's like, oh, now you're average, right? Like you just stopped at 6'4", 6'5", you're average now. So now you can't be the big, but you take a kid like, the Anthony Davises of the world that grow up being a guard that have to have the ball in their hands and learn guard positions. And then boom, they grow and they're 6'9", 6'10", whatever the case may be. they're at an advantage because they still remember those skills that they learned as a point guard. Now they just have to learn how to play around the rim and things of that nature. So being able to, I think they have an advantage for guys that take that height leap late, because they've had to learn skills that smaller guys had to learn, or that they would have had to learn to play a different role. And now they can become more versatile because they can play the one, but they also now are big enough to play the 2, 3, 4, whatever the case may be, depending on what height they get. So I think they have an advantage. I think that the disadvantage would be the fact that they have to learn how to adjust, potentially. Now, it depends a lot on role and where they go and things like that, but they may have to adjust to a role where they're not primarily the ball handler, where they have to play more of a wing type position off of someone else. That would be the one potential disadvantage that I would see. But for the most part, I think guys like that have big advantages, as far as their development goes as players, to be able to get that late height burst after they've learned the guard spots and things of that nature.
So maybe like specifically in shooting and handling, you don't think that like the significant growth over that short period of time, it doesn't affect like maybe their energy transfer, their ability to like handle the ball or react?
I think it does to a small extent, but I still think that they have the muscle memory of how they handle the ball, and that still puts them at an advantage, because they still remember how to do it. Now they just have to learn how to do it with different limbs, so to speak. I think shooting mechanics, a lot of times don't change just because, you know what I'm saying? Like, and I see shooting mechanics change more with age because of the ability to get power from, your legs, your arms, or whatever the case may be, versus size. If you already had a good jump shot when you were, 5'10", you'll probably still have a similar, jump shot when you're 6'3". So I think that actually doesn't have a huge effect. The ball handling piece is just probably the harder part of the two. If you were talking about a massive height difference. But I still, and this is just from visual, from what I've seen, I still think the biggest time that you would see that happen would be if you make a tremendous height, change from say 6'2" to 6'9", in the course of a year or so. Then you're playing at a different level now. You're not as low to the earth anymore, and you have to actually work to get down to the level that you were at previously. But I still think you have those mechanics in your head just from reps that you had at that smaller size.
How common is growth in like the high school level? Like most guys probably grow, but like what's like the average height? Like how often do you see like maybe the 6'2" to the 6'9" growth?
I think it's rare. From what I've personally seen and from things that I've heard and whatnot, I think it's rare to have a massive jump like that. I think in my experience as a coach so far, I've seen guys maybe at the high school level, more so dealing with juniors and seniors. Obviously, I've seen them, make a 1 or 2 inch growth change, in the course of 1 or 2 years. You know, at that age, 17, 16, 17, 18, like, you don't know necessarily what you're going to get. You might get some guys that make a massive leap, but I think for the most part, on average, you're going to see guys maybe get an inch or two, height gain at that point. And by this point, they've probably made the growth, the biggest growth spurt that they're going to have to get to the level that they're going to be at 9 times out of 10. But you obviously have your outliers that just sprout out of nowhere and just kind of like change up everything for their lives and yours as a coach too. So, but I think it's more of an outlier for sure.
So you're saying like maybe 1 or 2 inches throughout like the entirety of high school, or
Probably more so their last couple years, and that's just based off of what I've primarily coached, which is juniors and seniors. Guys that are going into their third and fourth year of high school. Obviously you're going to see a major jump from a kid from ninth grade to 12th grade. but a lot of that also just depends on, you know, their genetics. You see some kids that grow a ton before they ever get to high school, and then that slows down tremendously once they get to that age, you know, and they're pretty much set. um but you know, ninth to 12th grade, I mean, you're going to see some consistent progress. It could be, you know, an inch a year type thing. It could be an inch, you know, every other year, or 2 inches on the front end, and you may not get another one until the last year going into the, you know, your senior year. So that's one of those things that's just so variable and unpredictable. But I still have, personally, I've yet to see like a huge jump, you know what I mean? Where a kid just goes from like being, you know, sub 6 feet to all of a sudden is like, you know, 6'10" within a year.
So sorry, what was I gonna ask?
Good.
Uh, for stuff like for wingspan, right? I'll give you a sec. Fuck it.
Yep. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
So like the utility of wingspan is kind of apparent for like defense, especially. Like obviously
Right.
if you're longer, it's all easier to defend, but it's not as apparent like on offense. So do you think like if you have two guys who are maybe 6'7" and one guy has like a +4 wingspan, another guy just has like an average wingspan +0, whatever. Is there any benefit from that +4 on the offensive end specifically that you can think of?
Mm. I think I would say the only benefit that I truly see on the offensive end, outside of things that are, you know, just like rebounding, obviously, um, I could see some benefit as a ball handler as far as being able to keep the ball away from opponents. You know, when you're getting that dribble off and maybe you're escape dribbling, you know, you may be dribbling 4 inches further back than the average person. So, you know, that defender can't really get in there and get the ball from you the way that they may want to. Um, but outside of that, I mean, I personally can't think of anything that really gives you an advantage, um, wingspan wise, offensively, um, other than maybe like post up opportunities, right? Like I'm giving you a bigger target or a bigger, you know, catch radius, so to speak. If you throw it up, I can go get it in a much bigger, you know, radius of space. But I don't think it adds as much of an advantage, or nearly as much advantage as what you get out of it from the defensive end, obviously.
Do you think it's harder to develop shooting if you have a bigger wingspan?
Yes. Yes. And I think there's, you know, there's a lot that can go into that potentially, but from a mechanical standpoint, I think it's really hard, just from what I've witnessed, you know, working with guys with bigger wingspans. It's hard to get the mechanic aspect of your shot down. Um, because it's, you know, it's almost like a catapult, I guess. You know, kind of think about, you know, the bigger that catapult is, the harder it is to control it. So, you know, these guys with these 7 foot wingspans, you know, they have to really have good touch, and able to, in order to be able to have, you know, the ability to make those jump shots a little bit better, or their mechanics have to change a little bit where they have more of a high release jump shot, I think, from what I've seen. So, you know, we've got a kid on our team now, Eric Harding, that's 6'10". He's got about a 6'10", 6'11", you know, wingspan, to go along with it. And with that being said, you know, his release is so high on his jump shot that it helps to take away some of the excessive power that he would probably have if he released it lower. Um, Whereas he's got a counterpart, you know, on our team that's similar size, a 6'9", 6'10", a young man named Mason Hagedorn. But he actually has a wingspan that is, I think, an inch shorter than his height. Um, and so, but he's one of the best shooters that we have on the team. His form is fluid. It's repetitive every time. It's perfect. And it looks like, you know, more traditional jump shot. And so, you know, we kind of see it day to day. Like it's just different things that have to change. it's kind of interesting to see what different guys have to do to adjust to their wingspans. We've got another example, a kid, Kendall Campbell. He's about 6'7", 6'8", but he's got a 7-foot wingspan. And, you know, he has a more traditional looking true jump shot. But, you know, I think his ability to jump with his shot and kind of have that touch like a shooter helps him a lot with being able to shoot a more traditional jump shot without it looking, you know, mechanically any different or having to be a more high release type thing to take something off of it type situation.
So how do you know if a player has a good touch other than maybe it's as explicit as they're good at shooting threes, but is there anything more deeper than that? Like how do you define touch? Maybe.
I mean, I look at touch more so from their ability, at least from what I think makes the most sense. It's about your ability to be able to make shots closer to the rim, right? So you know, you can have a good shooting touch from outside where you're really letting it fly, but can you harness that at all? Can you make the quick hook shots that are just like, you know, I'm turning over my shoulder and just kind of dropping the ball into the net? Or do you have that same type of aggressive shot, you know, when the ball comes out of your hand, you know, when you're 10 feet away from the goal and as opposed to, you know, 20 feet away? So, you know, the guys that have really good touch around the rim, usually I feel like tend to have good touch on the floor everywhere. Um, but you've got guys that may be able to be good jump shooters because they you know can put all their force into a shot from deeper out, that may not have that touch around the rim. They're too aggressive. They get to the rim and they're throwing the ball off the backboard because they're still used to putting all of their power into certain shots. So from what we've, you know, witnessed, it seems to me that touch is more so like how well can you play closer to the basket and you know take something off of it versus putting, you know, a full force jump shot up into the air and having that ability as well.
So when you're talking about close to the basket, are you talking about like more like post ups? Or are you talking about like floaters? Or what specifically are you talking about?
It could be both. It could be both. And I think, you know, even with bigs now, I think they're starting to shoot a lot more floaters in the lane. Like they're getting to that point where they'll short roll and then, you know, it's one dribble into a floater. Even at whatever, 6'9", 6'10", they're one dribble floating into the lane. And that having that ability is opening up a lot of opportunities for them to score, versus having to go take a contested layup or trying to dunk on, you know, a Steven Adams or somebody that's not going to just let you get there. But it also comes with post-up opportunities as well. Can you turn over your left shoulder and make a right-handed jump hook, you know, when you get to the right spots? I think all of those things can potentially, you know, have that element of touch that you're looking for to really be able to um, control your shots, because that ultimately I feel like that's what touch is, right? Like really being able to have the ability to control the power of your shots from multiple different spaces.
And do you think that's like somewhat innate, like someone like they come in like that, or how much can you like really develop that?
um I definitely think that there's guys that come in that have more of it than others. I'll say that for sure. I definitely think that there's guys that just naturally have a certain level of touch. But I do think it's something that can be repped at the same time as well. Like I think if you know, anybody that takes enough floaters can learn how to shoot a floater because you're gonna train yourself um as to what that feels like, what, you know, what exactly that power, you know, should look like. You know, you can watch videos of guys like Zach Levine, right? Like he's known for being extremely explosive and you know getting to the rim and finishing strong. But if you go to YouTube, you can watch skill training videos of Zach Levine, you know, specifically working on, you know, his float game in the mid post, or in the lane, where he's learning how to do you know, a 1 foot floater, or a Euro step into a floater versus, putting himself in a position where he's just got to finish at the rim aggressively. So, and as watch him progress through certain seasons, you can see that he's starting to get more touch to have those in between shots, those different looks that he can get at the basket versus just doing the things that he was good at, when he first came into the league or when he was at UCLA.
So you would say there has to be like a baseline, like not everyone can develop that, but like if you start out at like a somewhat high point, you can make those improvements more feasibly, or like do you think like you gave the example of Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, like do you think like you said he didn't have good touch? How was that innate? Like is that just how he was, or was that an issue of his previous development? How do you reconcile those two things?
Um, I think Kid Gilchrist, a lot of what he had is so mechanical. I think, but I still think that he could have touch in certain spaces, like floaters, for example, because there's ways to shoot floaters with one hand that doesn't necessarily have the same effect as, you may have from a two-handed jump shot. With his situation was when he was spotting up shooting and, just from watching his mechanics, his arm is getting in too tight and he's got one hand in front of the ball and things like that. So he's having to there's a lot of torque and things that are having to go into his shot when it goes up in order to give it an opportunity to go straight and go in the goal, right? Like you're having to do a lot of different motions. Whereas, if he's getting to the lane and he's just going to float the ball, it could be as simple as him getting both hands on each side of the ball and then letting go of one and just almost form shooting, right? So he could find touch in that space. But, when you add that second hand, or when you put yourself in a position where you have to add more power to your shot in order to get it to the goal, things can start to break down. So it's definitely one of those things where I think, like you said, some people more innately have it. I would say from watching basketball, you would naturally think that guards have more touch, right? Like people that handle the ball more often have a better feel for the basketball and have more touch in those spaces. But you also see a lot of big men that have a lot of touch because of the fact that they're finishing around the rim so much. But I do think, obviously, in situations like a Kid Gilchrist or, guys that maybe don't have as good of mechanics in general, when it comes to jump shooting, is probably a little harder, I would assume, to get touch, for them. Now, I don't know that for sure. That's kind of just like an assumption. But I can't think of a ton of guys that aren't good jump shooters that, or at least decent, I'll say, like, average jump shooters that have really good touch in other spaces.
Yeah. Do you think
Maybe like a Sean Marion, like when I'm thinking back to just examples of that, like Sean Marion had a pretty decent in-between game around the rim and whatnot, but wasn't obviously the best jump shooter. Interesting shot mechanics and things of that nature.
I can think like there's a lot of guys who are great, like like they have good touch on post ups, but
Right.
obviously, and these are all mostly big men. But then when you pull them outside, it's not as they're not as successful. But the twist of that is perhaps there's like some correlation where you can look at players in college who maybe their free throw percentage is pretty decent, and on top of that, their touch like inside is great. So then
Right.
you can reasonably project and say when they get to the league, there's a greater chance that they'll be able to shoot at a league average level. Like one guy I'm thinking of immediately is like Sabonis. Like I
Mhm.
think it's like two threes. Maybe it was less. He was not a 3-point shooter, and
Right.
his post up game was incredible, especially Gonzaga. Their bigs are always like that, and his free
Right.
throw percentage is great. So I don't know. Maybe there is something. I've never really thought about the post up thing, but maybe the touch on inside the arc, inside especially like close to the rim. Maybe that is a good indicator of future like jump shooting potential. I don't know. What do you think about that?
I think that's valid. I mean, I think it makes sense. a lot of those things, like you said, having good touch around the rim gives you that ability to have touch. Being able to shoot spot up free throw shots is a lot of mechanical, work, obviously. So I think that's a valid argument. I think that guys that can do those things well have a greater chance of being able to step out and shoot a jump shot. Kind of flowing back into what we were talking about earlier, which is that, that jump shot is one of those things that you can just train standing there and just getting reps. So, if you can get the reps to be a great free throw shooter, then I just tell you to step back 2 steps and do the same thing that you were just doing from the free throw line, but put your legs into it a little bit more, keep everything upper body exactly the same, then that gives you a better chance to be able to translate that into being a good jump shooter. Whereas maybe that guy, like you said, that has decent touch around the rim, but maybe can't shoot free throws because his shot mechanics are bad or his form isn't really, very good. It's going to be more of a struggle for him to translate and get that jump shot because of the fact that we not only are having to change lower body stuff, but we're having to change upper body stuff as well. And it's really hard to, get guys to change habits that have been ingrained in them for God knows how long at that point.
So do you think there's a significant difference between like passing touch and shooting touch? Or do you think passing touch even exists? Or what are your thoughts on that?
I think passing touch definitely exists. I think there's no doubt about that in my opinion. But I do think they're two different things. Definitely. I think there's guys that can be elite level shooters that may not be great passers. And vice versa. I think we've seen several guys that were, really good passers over the years that may not have been great shooters in general, especially, several years ago when you had more of the traditional point guard that's just a pass first guy. A lot of those guys were great passers, had elite touch, but maybe just were not guys that you would look at to be, stepping out, shooting a three or, pulling up on a jump shot. So I definitely think that there's a difference between the two for sure.
So like one guy I'm thinking of is Alonzo. Like he's one of the best. His touch on transition passes is like that's crazy.
It's
But
crazy.
he obviously had his shooting struggles. So you think those are two different like processes that cause those different touches, or
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And not only from a mechanical standpoint, from a mental standpoint as well. I think a lot of touch when it comes to passing is also about being able to read and understand where you're looking to go with the ball, versus just being able to shoot, that same jump shot or get that shot up. I think that's one of the things that it's funny, almost like an imagination thing, right? Like having a great imagination can make you a great passer or a great shooter potentially. But I think it's one of those things where it's like if you can visualize, okay, my guy's going here, I want to lead that pass to a specific spot, and you do it enough, then you're going to start to trust it, right? So it kind of comes back to reps and time, but just in two different spaces. I don't think there's a direct correlation or way to train both of those, simultaneously, so to speak. I think there are two things that you have to train separately, but you have the ability to obviously get touch in both of those things to increase.
so do you think like it's reps and there's pattern recognition? I think those are the two components you're alluding to. Like obviously you have a lot of game time reps, but also the ability to process those reps and actually like if you're in a game, you can say, oh, these I've faced similar reps, I can make a similar type of decision making process. So
Right.
do players who are great decision makers, do you think they just like recognize patterns better, or do you think it's more important to have, even if a guy isn't a great pattern recognizer, just simply having those reps? Do you think that's more important? Like,
I think I think it's both, to some extent. Um, if it's I think if I had to choose between the two, I'd probably take a guy that naturally can just recognize patterns more often, because he's going to give himself a higher floor. Whereas a guy that maybe can't understand patterns as well is going to have to rep it, 2, 3 times as hard to make sure that they learn those things. I think that either one of those guys could get to an elite level, but that guy that can do it more naturally is going to give himself a leg up to get to that level faster and to potentially get further as well. Like you go back to Alonzo or a Mellow Ball, like those guys have done it for so long since they were kids, as far as making some of these passes that you just wouldn't, expect from the traditional point guard or from somebody their size, obviously, as well. I think they just naturally have an ability to do those things, but because they've been doing them for so long, they end up elevating, to the point that they are now. But I do think it's also something that can be taught through repetition. If I have you run, a certain play enough times or put you into a scenario enough times to make you have to see that pattern, then eventually you can learn it. My fear with that is you're learning it more in a controlled setting. And when we get into a live setting where it's not controlled and this person might do anything, is your brain going to signal you quick enough to make the right play in that moment? Or are you going to kind of, have to make that like, oh shit, I don't know what to do type thing,
Yeah.
because you just naturally don't have it. So that would be the upside to me, to take the natural guy, because I think in that moment when he's able to recognize it quicker, like boom, I'm getting the ball here because I see that guy going there type thing. And I think there may, and this is probably a little bit of a reach, but I think there may be something to be said for the natural guy is more fearless, so to speak, with some of those reads, right? Like he's not as afraid to mess up because he's naturally done it so many times or seen it work so many times that he'll take those risks to maybe, get a pass into a smaller window that the average person wouldn't take. And it may be a boom or bust type situation, but a lot of times it's going to pay off because they've seen it happen already, several times.
So like, is this like confidence or fearlessness? Is it potentially developed in high school, or do you think they already come in with that level of confidence?
Um, it depends. I think it depends. You can have both. I mean, we have both, even just on our team. We've got guys that, have confidence instilled in them as children, from their parents and their backgrounds and, their upbringing. And we've got guys that have become more confident since they've been there. You know what I mean? For one reason or another, either because they are playing for a coach that trusts them now, or because they are getting the opportunity to do something that they've never done and they're seeing themselves be successful with it in those spaces. But I think there's a group for both. I think there's definitely innate confident kids, and guys that are just built like that and just have it in them. And there's a group that you have to, help pull it out of, so to speak. Everybody has that ability. It's just a matter of if they're going to buy into it for themselves or not. But again, going back to kind of what I was just saying on the last one, I'm still going to take the kid that has it innately over the kid that doesn't, because there's always such a chance that that kid that doesn't have it innately can revert back to the habits that he's previously had. Whereas I know that the confident kid, I'm not going to have to worry about him shying away from, the moments that we need him the most potentially.
How about a guy like Ben Simmons, where like his confidence is rookie year, and obviously he's a great passer. His confidence is degraded significantly. How would you approach that kind of situation?
Whew, that's a rough that's a rough situation, man. I feel bad for the guy
Oh
because
yeah, for sure.
he comes in being a highly touted prospect, and you hear the LeBron James comparisons and things of that nature, and Magic Johnson comparisons and whatnot. And now you've got a guy whose confidence is funny that you even brought that up. We've been talking about that recently, just amongst our coaching staff. Like, he has no confidence at this point whatsoever. And I don't know. I don't know what that comes from. And that's the hardest thing, to watch a guy regress in a confidence standpoint is much harder to deal with than I think to try to bring a guy's confidence up, because you're taking a guy that was already confident and all of a sudden you can't figure out why he's not, performing the same way, or he's second guessing himself. This day and age, man, like it could be social media. Like, he's obviously getting killed on social media daily, and if he feeds into that stuff, then it's really hard for him. Or potential embarrassment, I guess, right? Like, we've seen these videos where Ben Simmons was practicing and shooting threes in summer and looking good. Like, damn, he can shoot, you know what I mean? But then when he gets in front of 30,000 people at a stadium or whatever the case may be, he's airballing layups from what we can see. Like, it's just it's kind of weird. But I think there's a big space now, for things that we can't necessarily control as coaches, right? Those things are like mental. Like, a lot of that is not just, hey, coach, can you help me get out of this slump? Like, there's something else going on there. So I think there's a big space now for sports therapy and sports psychiatrists to step in and kind of help guys, like, really get to the bottom of why they have lost something that they had for so long and how we can regain that. And so, if I'm being honest, like, at a point, like, you see a guy like Ben Simmons, I'm going to do everything I can on the basketball court to help him and to be supportive, obviously. But, there, I'm going to also suggest that he goes and talks to somebody that can tap into the mental side of what's going on with him, in a professional way that I wouldn't be able to necessarily do, to try to bring that back. Cause I mean, that's an extreme case. Like, I've never seen anything quite like it, to be honest with it. Him and Russell Westbrook right now, confidence wise, are just something that is almost mind blowing to watch, at this point.
Do you think there's like, so in terms of scouting specifically, there's a lot of like armchair GMs, almost like these guys on Twitter, obviously, who they kind of like diagnose these players preemptively. Like, for example, like Anthony Edwards, they said he didn't have a passion for basketball because he liked to rap and he liked to play football and like
Right.
stuff like that. So how do you, like, you're an actual scout, right? Like, you do all recruiting for your team and stuff. So how do you take that intel, and how do you evaluate competence and passion?
Um, I think you have to really get to know the person. Like, you have to, to your point, like, the Anthony Edwards thing is coming from people that don't know Anthony Edwards. Like, it's not coming from, the GMs necessarily that have sat down and met with Anthony Edwards extensively and, spent time around him and really, talk to him about what his goals are and things like that. Um, and that applies no differently to what I do, even at the prep high school level, right? Like, I may be looking at a kid and, I call around. We have to call and ask other people, like, hey, what do you know about such and such? Like, what do you know about this? What do you know about that with them? And you might get some negative feedback. Well, he doesn't really, love it. Like, he just, he's talented, but he doesn't love it. He doesn't want to get better, da 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 da. And you have to really take into account not only the accounts of outside people, but the person themselves. Like, really, sit down and talk to them, like, about their goals, their passions. Like, yeah, it's okay to have other things that you enjoy, but what is it that you're truly chasing, in life? What is your goal here? And so, I think, to your point, just like the armchair guys, it's something that keeps them busy. It's something that gives them a platform. And they have a job to do, a lot of those guys, right? Like, they're trying to, whether it's for themselves or for a company that they work for, they're trying to get eyes on them, which is fine, and trying to, break a story potentially, or, have some intel that everybody else doesn't have. But you really have to trust your own judgment at some point, when it comes to not only the outside opinions and the people that know them from a different perspective, but from the perspective of the person themselves as well. And I'm sure, Minnesota is happy with the fact that they
Yeah.
didn't feed into that, right? Like you've got one of the most promising young players in the league. And regardless of, I don't care if he loves football more than he loves basketball. Like he comes out there and does his job at a high level, and is a killer on the basketball court. And that's what we need. So yeah, you can't give in to third party opinions like too much. You got to really trust your intel and trust your own judgment in those situations as well.
We see a lot of benefit of these like players who played multiple sports, maybe like, growing up or even high school. Like, do they tend to have more success, or do they generally just all play a lot of sports? How do you work with that?
Um, I think the positive that I've seen from guys that are multi-sport athletes a lot of times is that it's the non-tangibles. A lot of times they're more coachable. They're a lot of times they have a different mentality about how they approach the game. For example, guys that play football and basketball tend to be more physical on the basketball court because they're used to being physical on the football field. They carry a different mentality when it comes to that. It kind of that their ability to handle adversity, because and it's not because of the sport specifically, but I think it's the time, right? Like they're constantly putting themselves in positions where they're being coached or being in adverse situations. If you play football, basketball, and baseball, or even just let's say football and basketball, right? Because of AAU and grassroots, you're being coached or being in game type situations for 75% of the year. You're going from football season where you're being coached and playing into directly into basketball season. Basketball season ends, you're going directly into grassroots. There's no in between. Like you may get like a month off before you're right back into football again. So I think that you get a lot of benefit out of those things, especially in your younger years. Now, I think there's a separation point though, where it benefits you to focus all of your attention on one or the other, unless it's a sport that's like multiple seasons apart. Like if you played football and ran track, I think you can maintain both of those even up to the collegiate level, because they translate, and then there's a gap in between the two that you can train. Um, but I think if you play football and basketball, the days of guys like Julius Peppers is kind of long gone realistically. You usually have to pick one, because if you're going to play basketball, as a football player, you're going to be behind the eight ball unless you're spending a ton of time doing training for both. Because when you're on the football field, for example, they're the kids that you're going to be playing against during basketball season are doing basketball workouts, and they're getting chemistry, and they're, advancing their skill set and things like that. So I think the non-tangibles are huge for that multi-sports. But I think the tangible things kind of can get held back if you continue it to past a certain point, just because of time and reps opportunities.
Are there any positions on like football that translate to basketball, or like any specific or players that play a specific position in football that like tend to have like a good relative extent of success in the basketball, or what?
Yeah, absolutely. I think quarterbacks transition really well to the guard position, because they have to learn how to read the football field. They're used to being in positions of leadership. I think defensive backs do the same thing. They're super quick twitch guys most of the time that have to learn how to make movements on the fly and adjust on the fly. And then I've seen, over time, you see a lot of tight ends as well. They're guys that are not only physically big, but they have to play big as well. Those guys have to be very versatile. They have to be able to block. They have to be able to run and catch a pass. Those things translate to, a guy that can be a great screener, a guy that can then be a great post-up threat and could potentially step out and shoot shots. Those things I think translate well. And I think you've seen multiple situations where those things have happened. Maybe even wide receiver, obviously height, from a height perspective, height and jumping obviously is going to traditionally just lead straight into potential positives for basketball. But I think from what I can tell, just thinking back in the history of some of the guys that I've seen, I think wide receivers tend to be more successful on the football field than the basketball field because they're just super athletic guys. And when they go play basketball, they're just kind of like run and jump wing type guys. Like, AJ Green, Randy Moss, those guys were like really good high school basketball players because they were just so much bigger, faster, and more explosive than the guys that they were playing around. But you get your guys every now and again, like a LeBron, obviously, that wide receiver into it. But I think there's been several instances of guys that played quarterback that made that transition over to playing the guard spots. And, there could be some translation there.